This is our second video dealing with religion. Again, you should be reading chapter 6 in the textbook. Let's begin with our learning objectives for this video. There are three. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the relative sizes in terms of numbers of people, of the main religions, and in some cases also religious categories, meaning those types we talked about in the last video. Then we're going to talk about which of these religions are growing and which are not. Finally, we're going to talk about the geographic origin and also the spread of at least the universalizing religions. And in this particular case, we're only going to look at Christianity, and then in the subsequent video, we'll move on to both Islam and Buddhism. So why don't we begin? It's going to be a little bit confusing. I've got this pie chart, which of course nobody likes to look at a pie chart, but I'm going to make it simpler. I know it looks kind of like a chaotic mess, but firstly, draw your attention to this over here. Notice there is an area here where it says ethnic religions. And in that category, you've got East Asian, ethnic, Hindu, and then other ethnic. If you add up these percentages together, you get about 25%. So that means today, in the world, only about 25% of the world's population identifies with one of these ethnic religions. Keep in mind that a lot of these ethnic religions are polytheistic. So another way of putting that then is about 25% of the world today adheres to a polytheistic religion. Now that leads to an interesting conclusion. If we could go back in time, let's say about 3,000 years ago, before Christianity, before Islam, before Buddhism, before any of the big universalizing religions, something like maybe 99% of the world's population would have followed one of these ethnic/polytheistic religions. So the big trend, again, over the course of the last few thousand years, has been a shrinkage of the ethnic religions, a relatively smaller share of the so-called polytheistic religions. This leads to the second point that I want to highlight. If you follow this outer circle right here, the universalizing religions, remember that they are the ones that are open to all. They tend to travel well. They tend to spread quickly. They now constitute about 60% or thereabouts of the total human population. So it's those universalizing religions that tend to be the fast growing. Then within the universalizing religions, let's just look carefully at this. Again, it's kind of hard to see. All of these are basically the different branches of Christianity. So Christianity represents about 1/3 of the total globally today. These two here represent the different branches of Islam, Sunni Muslim and Shia Muslim. Together, they're just under 20%, or about 1/5 of the total. Remember, both Christianity and Islam are monotheistic and also universalizing. And then finally, the smallest of the universalizing religions, again, not monotheistic, is Buddhism. It's only about 6% of the global total. And the only other thing that I wanted to point out is this. What on earth does this category mean, non-religious? Well, in the modern world, especially in the wealthier countries, and especially in the very big cities of the global north, there's a huge percent of the population that is basically secular, meaning they're no longer religious. Perhaps other things have taken the place of religion, science, shopping, whatever it might be. And so that component there, 15% of the global total, that's probably growing as well. So let's move on to a summary statement of all of this information. Let's move away from that pie chart. I want to just put out the main points that we just talked about, and I'll show you all of these first. So, about 60% of the total global population today practices one of those big universalizing faiths. It could be Islam, it could be Christianity, it could also be Buddhism. One of those three. You take those three together and you get 60% of the world's population. That's new. That's happened relatively recently, over the course of about the last 3,000 years. So for just a tiny sliver of the total time that humans have been on this planet. And that's that big trend once again. Now, 55% of the world total practice one of those monotheistic faiths. So Christianity, Islam, and then a really tiny sliver for Judaism. 33% of the global total identifies Christian, that's about 2 billion. 20% of the world total identifies Muslim, about 1.25 billion. So that means Christianity is the world's largest religion, followed by Islam, followed by, interestingly, Hinduism, one of the ethnic religions, just because India is so populous. Now, one interesting point that I want to make before I go on to the rest of the information on this slide is that all of these, and this entire category, in fact, are growing. They're all growing because the universalizing faiths are open to anyone. Doesn't matter your skin color, your creed, what religion you were before, how much income you have, anybody can convert. And as a result, they tend to travel quickly, they tend to travel well, so to speak. Now, again, there are some other things I want to point out from that particular slide we just got done looking at. Only about 25% of the world today practices one of the ethnic religions. That number is going down. It doesn't mean that the number of people who practice an ethnic polytheistic religion is absolutely going down. It just means that the overall percent is going down. And it's going down slowly, but the reason it's going down is because so many people are converting to especially either Christianity or Islam. Those are, in fact, the two fastest growing religions in the world. And then finally, about 15% of the world's total basically says, I have no religion, I'm non-religious, I am what they call secular, which means that you basically no longer involve yourself in organized religion in any way. That number as well is going up. As wealth goes up, as we become more urban, typically that number is also going to go up. So it's positively related to wealth and urbanization. So to summarize, all of these, including this big category going up, ethnic religion as a percentage going down, and also non-religious trending over time to go up as well. Okay, we're going to now move on to a somewhat different set of ideas. We're going to focus for the rest of this video and in the first part of the next video on the geographic origin and then the spread of the world's primary religions. What we're going to do here over the course of the next roughly 10 minutes, and again moving on to the next video, is we're going to only talk about the geographic origin of the universalizing religions. And that makes sense because the universalizing religions are really the only ones that are going to grow geographically quickly, again because they are open to all. The three that we will look at are Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, but in this video we will only look at Christianity, which is about 2,000 years old. So we need to go and find where Christianity originated, and then we're going to talk about the geographic spread. Another word for that is diffusion, so don't get confused. Geographic spread over time basically implies geographic diffusion. They mean the same thing. So I've got this general map here that actually shows the geographic origin and diffusion of all three of the universalizing faiths. Because right now we're only looking at Christianity. Let's start out there. It's purple, and then although there's a lot of detail here, each one of these different set of arrows represents how it spread over time. The origin of Christianity is right here in what Americans call the Middle East, generally, specifically in the contemporary state of Israel and the Palestinian territories. Now, it's important to understand something about Christianity. Christianity basically comes from Judaism. Jesus was born a Jew, and he lived in the Jewish culture in that part of the world. So you might often then think of Christianity as almost being like a reform movement within Christianity. But the more important point is that they are deeply connected and deeply intertwined. Now, Christianity spread very successfully in the first 800 years of its existence, just about everywhere nearby, but especially it spread very successfully into Europe. Europe became basically the center of Christianity, in part because the Romans and the Roman Empire officially converted to Christianity about 300 years after its advent. That's an important point because Christianity then becomes a global religion because of European colonialism. In other words, Europeans carried Christianity with them to North America, to Brazil, to Latin America, and to all of the different places that were wrapped up in the European colonial enterprise after about 1500 AD. And so if you're curious, how is it that Christianity became global and not just regional? It has to do primarily with colonialism. I want to just show you all just two more maps here, just to round out our discussion of Christianity. Again, there's a lot of detail here that you don't need to know. But what it shows is basically the geographic footprint, if you will, of Christianity at an earlier time. It says here, the red, the boundary of the Roman Empire at its greatest extent, about roughly AD 117. And then the areas within the Roman Empire that are color-coded with the brown, those are areas that had become strongly Christian by AD 325, so 325 years after the advent of Christianity. What do these brown areas have in common? Well, they're all coastal, by and large. They're near the Mediterranean Sea. And they tend to be focused on the biggest cities: Constantinople, Rome, a variety of other places like Carthage and Alexandria. And if you don't know those particular places, that's fine. But just know it was especially the case that coastal areas within the Roman Empire, especially the big cities, were the first to become dominantly Christian. And I'm hoping that makes sense. These are the places that would have been exposed to new ideas from the outside world. Christianity begins here, and then it spreads through basically the vessel of the Mediterranean. But notice, way up in northern Europe, those areas didn't become Christianized or strongly Christian until almost something like 700 or even 800 years later. And that's why those Anglo-Saxons and Utes that left Jutland in the 400s and went over here to Britain, they weren't Christian. Again, they were Nordic polytheists. One final map, and it's a chaotic mess. Don't worry about the details. But I just wanted to show that when you look at this map here, there are two kind of interesting points. The red line basically represents the limit of Christianity's spread up to about 1,000 years after its advent. And you can see that it includes just about all of Europe. But some of the more remote parts of Europe, Finland, Estonia, what we today call Lithuania and Latvia, they had yet to be Christianized. Why? Because they were remote. They didn't have a lot of connections to the rest of Europe, especially the Mediterranean world. And so Christianity was late in arriving in this part of Europe. The way that I would characterize this is basically northeastern Europe was the last part of Europe to be Christianized because, again, its remote location. And the other thing that I wanted to show you is this. Over here in Spain, but also down here in what we call the Balkan part of Europe, B-A-L-K-A-N, there's an interesting battle, if you will, that goes on through a long period of history between Christianity and its younger sibling, that's Islam, where if you look, this dashed line represents the limit of Christianity in 700 AD, and then the limit of Christianity in 1050 is that darker line. And what this implies is that Spain was once largely Christian, but then it must have flipped to Islam. And that's exactly what did occur. People who lived in northern Africa, the Moors, had invaded Spain, conquered Spain, and they carried their religion with them. So I guess what I mean to imply then is that these borders are not fixed. They change over time. The geographic footprint of religions is not set in stone, but tends to change over time. When we get back, we'll look at both Islam and Buddhism.